As I was trying to think of a parallel that was more modern for us, I couldn't help because, it's playoff season, right? So there's football everywhere. And one of my traits, but also one of many people that I know, is the armchair quarterback. And you question plays, you question what's going on, like how could you not see that? As though the players that are, like, especially in front of the quarterbacks, I don't know if you've ever seen these people in real life. They're huge, especially the linemen. They are huge. And they're little freight trains. They can go so fast. And like they were showing the stats on one of them. One of them was 6'9" and 375 pounds or something like that, and can run under 40 yards in under 5 seconds, or right around 5 seconds. That's unnatural. That's one of the Nephilim. Plus, we have all the benefits of slow-mo replays, and we're watching the whole field from above, basically, on TV. We have huge advantages from that, but then again, we're not on the field. Because there is a difference between watching a game and being on the field. Which I think is what John is trying to get at a little bit in this little tiny little 3-sentence jabby, sharp passage. John says a bunch of people were in Jerusalem during the Passover and they believed in his name. We'll get to that in a moment, because they saw the signs he was doing. But the word John uses there in the Greek is not really noticed or observed. It is closer to spectating. They're sitting in the stands watching it all go on. And they might have been rooting for him, for sure. But they believed in his name because they were spectating the signs. And then he drops this line that should make us sit up straighter. He says, Jesus did not, however, entrust himself to them. And when I said I would get back to that, when I said, I don't know why they do this, because it's the same, I do know why, but it's the same exact word. They were entrusting in Jesus because they were spectating the signs, but he was not entrusting himself to them. Same exact words. Which seems interesting to me. Because what follows is really kind of, those last two verses are really kind of strange, because they often get translated as what we heard today. He knew what was in people. And when I looked at it, I would not have translated that. I would have translated he knew what was in the man himself. He knew what was in himself. He knew what was coming for himself. That's the way it reads to me, but we will let it be as it stands right now. There's still that idea of believing or entrusting or trusting that's being used. Like John is saying, they believed in him, but he didn't believe in them. Not because Jesus is petty or he's trying to gatekeep grace or whatever it is, but I think it's because Jesus knows the difference between a faith that watches and one that gets in the game. And I think that's the difference that's playing out in this whole sermon. Spectators want proof, they want action, they want, their team to win, right? But disciples get in the game. And here in, now we're in the second half of January. Sometimes it's good that time rushes on, right? But in this dark season, we can get into this kind of religion that just sits and watches, because that's what we're doing most of our days, is kind of sitting and watching the world. We stay just kind of nearby. We'll show up. We'll nod at the right moments. We'll cheer when something great happens. And we'll even feel stirred sometimes. But we hold back. We stay safe. Stay in the stands. And John just lays out the truth. You could be near Jesus, but still be holding back. So I want to ask this question. I want to ask it as a question, because I don't think John's trying to shame us. I think he's pushing us towards self-awareness. So when you come close to Jesus, what do you do? Do you come close like a spectator, or like someone ready to get in the game? Do you come close for cover or for conversion? And that's where our tradition gets really helpful. John Wesley preached a sermon a very long time ago. And if whenever you think Qoheleth of Ecclesiastes might be wrong, there is nothing new under the sun. John Wesley's saying this in 1741. It's going on now. It was going on before him. And the sermon was called The Almost Christian. And the whole point was that almost is a whole category. It's not imaginary. Almost is actually common. It says many people have been almost persuaded to be Christians. And that it matters because almost is not the same as altogether. He says an almost Christian can have real decency, or basic decency, what he calls heathen honesty, which he got from the book of Timothy. But they have basic justice, basic truth-telling, basic human goodness. An almost Christian can also have what he calls a form of godliness. The outside religion, the habits, the boundaries, the church-shaped life. He can even use the means of grace, worship, prayer, communion, family prayer, private prayer. Do it with some sense of seriousness. And he even says that sincerity matters. A person can really want to please God, really intend to do what is right, and still be almost. Which begs the question, of course, well, what's missing, John, right? And he says what is missing is not more religious activity. What's missing is the inward reality that reforms the whole person. He says being an altogether Christian includes not just love of God and love of neighbor, but also one that actually produces repentance and love and good works. So when John says, this is the gospel writer John, not John Wesley. So when John says people believed because they saw signs, but Jesus did not entrust himself to them, Wesley gives us a little bit of language for that. It's possible to be impressed with God and with Christ and still be almost. It's possible to be drawn in by the goodness and the beauty and the power and still keep your own hands on the steering wheel. It's possible to say, I believe, and still not yield yourself. That's why I called this sermon Cover or Conversion, because it's the kind of religion that uses Jesus as cover. Cover from guilt, cover from fear, cover from loneliness, cover from the feeling that life is out of control. And I get it. Honestly, I get it. Life can be a lot. But cover is not conversion. Cover says, I want enough Jesus to feel safe, but not so much that I feel like I have to change too much. Conversion says, I'm putting my weight down, I'm yielding, reform me. And John gives the clue about what gets in the way. He says Jesus knew what was in people. That's the scary line, if you hear it like a threat. But John's not trying to scare anybody into compliance. He's just describing reality. Jesus sees the difference between surface level belief and deep trust. He can tell when we're attracted to signs and allergic to depth. So, what would that look like in the real world? Sometimes we hold back because we want to stay in control. Sometimes we hold back because we've been hurt. Sometimes we hold back because we're afraid of what Jesus might actually ask of us. And sometimes we hold back because we're comfortable with religion being a spectator sport. And sometimes, honestly, I think we hold back because we've learned to perform faith in public without letting faith touch our hearts. And again, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Jeremiah gets at it. Jeremiah gets nasty in chapter 7. He's talking about people showing up at the temple and assuming that the building will keep them safe, even while their whole lives, their whole everyday lives are out of alignment. That's cover religion. Isaiah 29 says people will honor God with their lips while their hearts are far away. That's cover religion. Jesus quotes that same idea in Matthew 15 when he's calling out the way tradition become an excuse. That's cover religion. And James just says it bluntly. Don't just hear the word, do it. Religion that never changes into action is thin. It's almost. So here's a question that should keep us honest. What's your cover? What do you use Jesus for without letting Jesus reform you? And I want to tread carefully because, again, I'm not trying to avoid truth because it applies to me as well. But I want to avoid shame because we are human beings moving on towards perfection, as John Wesley says. Because let's be honest, some people learned cover religion because they had to. Some people grew up in a world where vulnerability was punished. Some were trained to look strong, not be honest. Some lived through seasons where they did not have extra emotional capacity for a deep overhaul. But even when cover religion is understandable, it's still a ceiling. It keeps us from maturity. And John is inviting people past the ceiling. Not with a guilt trip, but with an invitation. Here's the cleanest way I can say that invitation. Jesus isn't looking for fans. Jesus is looking for disciples. I almost used the word followers there, but that's gotten all changed in social media day and age, right? If you remember from last week, discipleship is this kind of apprenticeship. It's learning from Jesus how to be like Jesus. Not learning just about him, but how to be him and then being him. That's what Christian means, little Christ. And what says almost Christian is the person who can do a lot of religious things, but not ever yield their heart. While as altogether Christian is the person whose trust in God is real enough to reform love, reform desire, reform speech, reform our care of neighbor, or even of each other. That's conversion. Not a moment of hype, it's a turning. And it keeps turning. A reforming that keeps reforming. And I want to do another little call back to last week's sermon. If you remember that word truth, emet. The one that can help us keep from turning conversion into this kind of private feeling. If you remember, it carries more than just being factual. It's a sense of firmness, of reliability, of stability, of faithfulness, of trustworthiness, of integrity. Again, not just accurate information, it's faithfulness you can actually stand on, you can count on. So when faith becomes conversion, it becomes more than assent to a list of correct beliefs. It becomes a life that actually has traction to change itself and the world. To become a person who can be counted on, a community that can be counted on, a church where truthfulness and integrity aren't slogans, they're habits. Which is why, for John Wesley, and for us, really it should be, almost is not enough. Almost doesn't hold weight when the ice is thin. So how do we move from cover to conversion without turning into some kind of self-improvement project that flames out like probably everybody's New Year's resolution has so far? John helps by showing us what kind of belief this was. It was sign-based belief. Remember, they believed in him because they saw the signs he was doing. And he's already shown us that the demand for a sign can be a dodge. The section just before this was the first time he went to a synagogue and cleared it out because they were selling stuff in there. So John has that happen twice, by the way. So this was the early one. And 4 verses before this, the rabbis come up to him in the synagogue, and their question was, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" So when John says they believed because of the signs, I don't think it's automatically praise. Most signs in the Gospels are things that people benefit from, right? Healings, relief, abundance. And since we're talking about John, water turning into wine. That can form a faith that claps when it gains something, but then stiffens when Jesus asks us for something. Spectators love a useful Jesus. Conversion begins when Jesus stops being useful and we still give ourselves over. I don't know how many times he said several things. What is it going to take for people? He even says, you can bring somebody back from the dead and they still won't believe you. So if our faith is mostly about watching what Jesus can do or asking him to do something for us or yelling at him when he fumbles the ball on a quarterback sack, we're probably still in covenant. If our faith is about being reformed into someone who loves God and neighbor more and more truly and more deeply every day, then we are stepping out into conversion. Wesley describes the heart of it as love of God and love of neighbor that is grounded in real faithfulness. So here are a couple questions that are simple but not easy. First, where are you impressed by Jesus but unchanged? And second, where are you holding back? Not where your neighbor is holding back, not where someone else is holding back, where you're holding back. Because the turning point in this passage is not believing in the sense of agreeing. The turning point is about that word and trusting. And you cannot entrust something to somebody without yielding it to them. So let's make it specific with a couple common places that people hold back, especially in churches that have lived through hard years, right? We hold back our trust. We hold back our honesty. We hold back our generosity. We hold back our willingness to repair what was broken. We hold back our willingness to love somebody that we didn't pick to be around in the first place. And Cover says, I will do religion, but I will not surrender my patterns. Conversion says, reform me starting with one pattern. So here's the invitation again. Third weekend, one step, one more step. Not 10, just one. Pick one place where you know you have been using faith as a cover and practice one act of yielding trust. If you've been holding back on honesty, tell the truth in a relationship with kindness. If you've been holding back on repair, make one repair you've been avoiding. If you've been holding back trust, pray one honest prayer that includes your fear, not just your politeness. If you've been holding back on love of neighbor, do one act of mercy for someone who can't repay you. James would call that being a doer, not just a hearer. Jeremiah would call that leaving the cover religion. Wesley would call that moving from almost to altogether. Actually, he'd call it moving on towards perfection. And John, I think, would call that the kind of faith Jesus can entrust himself to as well. Now, of course, I need to make this communal because we are, again, Methodist, and private faith stays theoretical for the most part. In fact, one of those words for observant is actually tied to where we get our word theory. That word that meant spectating. Here's one communal practice for this week. Before next Sunday, and you all can do it online too, it's not too late. Tell one person from this church one sentence. This is the place I've been using faith as cover. Then tell them one more sentence. This is one act of yielding trust that I'm going to practice this week. then again, next Sunday, check in with each other after worship. Just to practice becoming people who trust each other too. I don't know when that went away from us, but it's been a long time. Actually, I probably could answer that, but I don't want to do that. Because the goal is to be reformed, made new, right? The old has gone, the new has come. And Jesus is not trying to shame us for being near or almost. It's an invitation to come nearer with your whole self, not cover conversion.